The DJI RC Pro is $900 more than the DJI RC, and honestly, most of the time, I prefer this little controller here. But there are a couple of reasons and a couple of cases where you would definitely want the RC Pro. Today, I want to break down the differences between these great controllers for you and show you the couple of instances where you probably will want to spend the extra $900 for the RC Pro. But honestly, in 90% of the cases, this little guy is going to be the best option for you. Let's go over the features of the RC Pro real quick. One, you've got this really nice display. It's 1,000 nits, which is great in bright outdoor settings. You've also got a 5D button here, which means you can move it in 4 directions and press it, and it acts as a button there. You've got this extra button here. You've got your typical power on, home point, pause, and then your selection for mode switch. You've got this little back button arrow here, which allows you to go out of the app and into the main screen. Then on the front side, you've got the camera for still button taking, and then the start-stop recording for video mode. You have this here, which can be assigned to aperture control or ISO control, a lot of different things. And then this is your gimbal control here. And then on the bottom, you have a couple of buttons, really nice C1, C2 here, really great. On the front here, you actually have external antennas, and from what I understand, this actually has internal and external antennas, so it gives you kind of the best of both worlds. And this is definitely heaviest at 703 grams, or 700-ish grams, depending on how you outfit it. On the bottom side here, you have a SD card, micro SD card port, a USB-C port for charging and for data, and an HDMI, mini HDMI. Now let's go over the features of the DJI RC. You've got this really nice, same size display. On the DJI RC, you have a 700 nit. And 300 nits doesn't sound like a lot, but if you're standing in bright sunshine, it really is a lot. And then you've got a power button, mode selection button, your battery indicators, of course, home button, and a pause button, which doubles. I think you have, if I remember right, you have to double press to go home, or press once to pause if you're active tracking, something like that. Got your gimbals, which are very nice. And then on the front side here, you have your camera button for still photos and your video record start-stop button there. On the bottom, you have a C1 and a C2 button here. And then, of course, you also have your sticks storage there. And then on the front here, you have a USB-C port for charging, a USB-C port to plug in if you're going to do firmware updates and stuff like that. And then you also have a micro SD card. You'll notice that there is no HDMI out, and you cannot send video out of either of the USB ports. And coming across the front here is the antennas, which are built in, so you don't have any external antennas. It also only has 2 antennas, and that does make a difference on range. And because it's only 390 grams, it is fantastic for backpacking. Coming down to the differences, there's quite a bit of difference in size. Maybe not as much as you might think. There's definitely a little bit of difference in height and a little bit of difference in thickness, but there's a massive difference in weight. You're talking 700 grams to 390 grams. That's a pretty big difference, especially if you're gonna be packing these in a bag and backpacking with them. This one will just fit really nicely. The other big difference comes in battery life. This has a 5,200 milliamp hour battery, which is rated for 4 hours, whereas this has a 5,000 milliamp hour battery, and because of the higher screen draw, you're only gonna get about 3 hours. In my experience, you get a lot more battery life out of this when you're flying compared to the DJI RC Pro. I would say 4 to 5 batteries compared to 7 batteries, maybe 8 batteries, depending on how you're flying. Battery life isn't everything, and size and weight isn't everything. The brighter screen on the DJI RC, if you fly outdoors in bright conditions a lot, is going to be very useful and very nice. This is considerably dimmer. The DJI RC is considerably dimmer, but if you get a sun hood or something like that, it will help. But when it comes down to the functionality of these two, that's where there's also a very large difference. So in this, you have a lot more customizable buttons on the RC Pro that you can customize how you want the RC Pro to function, and your kind of quick selections on all of the different buttons, the C buttons, C1, C2, C3, and this back button, which is conspicuously absent on the DJI RC. And the reason for that is this, that when it comes to the operating, you can use the DJI Fly app that is built into this because it's an Android device. Whereas this, you can actually do a lot more. You can sideload apps, like I have Firefox loaded on this so that I can send my screen recordings directly to Dropbox. You can surf the internet if you wanted to on this. You can do a lot more with this particular controller than you can with this as far as other things you can do with it and side loading apps and going above and beyond. This is a much more full-featured Android device, whereas this, the DJI RC, you are pretty much locked into just the DJI Fly app, and that's about it. Another difference to note is that the DJI RC Pro has 32 gigabytes of memory built in, whereas the DJI RC has no built-in memory. So if you're going to do things like screen record or anything like that, you need to put an SD card in the bottom, or micro SD card in the bottom, whereas the DJI RC Pro, it does have the 32 gigs of memory built in, so you can screen record or save, cached footage. This, the DJI RC, is limited to 720p screen recording, which isn't bad, but the DJI RC Pro can do 1080p screen recording, which is definitely more useful, but they also handle screen recording differently. They both save to the SD card if you tell them to. The DJI RC does save it to the SD card by default. The DJI RC, you have to tell it to save to the SD card, set your storage device area. But another big difference between these two is that I can pull, at least on a Mac, I can pull the screen recordings directly off the SD card of the RC, the DJI RC, whereas with the RC Pro, I found the easiest way, frankly, about the only way I can get the recordings off on Mac is send them to Dropbox, upload them to Dropbox directly from the RC, and then get them from Dropbox onto my computer. It's an Android Mac thing. It's a thing. It's not just with these remotes, but it's with a lot of different Android devices. So on battery life, the DJI RC wins. On screen brightness, the DJI RC Pro wins. On functionality, the RC Pro wins because it has a lot more functions and a lot more options on how you can use it. For size and weight, the DJI RC wins because it's much smaller, much lighter, and frankly, even though it's smaller and light, the battery lasts way, way longer. When it comes to range and distance, both of these remotes will fly well beyond your visual line of sight. So that really isn't something that concerns me. The RC Pro will get better range just because it has 4 antennas plus these two external antennas, which makes a big difference. But the area that I notice the most is when you're flying in congested areas with lots of other RF environments. So there's a lot of interference or a lot of other stuff your drone is competing with for signal. Or if you're flying in dense forests and there's a lot of trees around where your drone might be moving between the trees and you. The DJI RC will get you much stronger and much more solid signal link because of those extra antennas, and I think mostly because of the external antennas, than the RC Pro will. I've noticed a few times where I've dropped behind a bank of trees to come up over them and reveal something. I will immediately lose a bar or 2 bars of signal on this, where this will pretty much hold it steady or maybe lose 1 bar depending on the particular situation. The biggest reason you might want to consider the DJI RC Pro is this, the HDMI out. And I know not a lot of people need HDMI out, but if you're going to do anything like live streaming or live broadcast or show other people, a director, something on this monitor, rather than you sitting next to each other in a car crammed right together, you can HDMI out and output this to a director's screen or Video Village or anything like that, and that makes a huge difference. And in my case, it's come in extremely handy because I have done live broadcast events for things like ESPN, and I've also done a lot of things where I've been by Video Village outputting this to a big 65-inch screen so that they could see what I was doing with the drone without having to crowd around me and this tiny controller. So having the HDMI out is absolutely invaluable in certain situations. Another thing to note between these two controllers is that they both have a built-in GPS chip, which is useful if you're in a moving vehicle trying to update your home point so that your drone doesn't think it's much farther away from the home point than it actually is, especially if you're out in a boat over open water. It's especially useful to be able to update your home point. But with either one of these, you have to download a map ahead of time in order for the drone to know where it is, or connect it to your cell phone via the hotspot and make sure the drone, the controller, knows where it is compared to where the drone is. Otherwise, your updating home point won't work. And that's where having built-in 32 gigabytes of memory on the RC Pro does come in really handy, is that you can download and cache maps. So is the DJI RC Pro worth $900 more than the DJI RC? Yes, if you need the extra functionality of HDMI out and being able to do more stuff with the controller with a brighter screen out in the outdoors. But honestly, for most people, this little guy here is gonna do just great. Now, if you wanna see my settings for my Mavic 3s, you can click or tap right here. I'll see you over there as always. If you have questions, ask me in the comments below or join my live stream, which happens Wednesday nights at 4 p.m. Alaska time, 8 p.m. Eastern. I'll see you again soon in the next video. Cheers.